The young girl, who had a toned figure and was in excellent physical shape, had long brown hair, and she was the best high-ranking agent. Having lived for many years as a hired killer, she pretended to be different people to carry out her tasks. And then the same thing happened again, and in the face of her own death, she sat in front of the man she had trusted all her life, with many lasers pointed at her that could fire at any moment. Looking into his eyes, she asked how he could do such a thing. The girl really did not believe that he just went and betrayed her. At that moment, Lazar pierced her body. She immediately felt a sharp pain, and blood began to flow from her limbs. This beautiful girl was called Sonbi, and the man who was next to her said that over the past many years, she had taught him everything. She said that their job is to carry out any task of the organization, no matter what the cost. In the end, the girl herself realized that this was a so-called mission, and the man confirmed these words. It was indeed a murder order. Although it looked more like an order to execute a traitor, in the end he was only going to ask her one last question. He asked why she had spared the family so many times, and at that moment she smiled happily and said that she had no idea why I did it, and also asked if it was really that important now. At that moment, the girl threw aside some piece of paper and loudly shouted at all the people who pointed a laser at her and asked why they hesitated and didn't shoot. Sonbi hoped that they would end this quickly, but in the end, no one fired. The girl then, smiling happily, said that she had said that the one who hesitates dies first. After that, she fell to the ground because she was completely exhausted of her strength. She was at the limit and could no longer do anything. The man started asking her something. However, Sonbi didn't hear anything. She had truly lost everything she could. She didn't understand why he had to make such a face after killing her with his own hands. But now it didn't matter to her. In the end, her eyes closed and her breathing stopped. Thus, she died at the hands of the youngest, whom she trusted the most, and the organization that she had faithfully served for many years. While the girl was dying, she wondered if there was any next life at all, and if someone like her had one, because perhaps she didn't deserve such a chance. This was certainly a futile wish. However, Sonbai believed that if there was a next life, she hoped that it would not be connected to murder. And she also decided that she would never be able to trust anyone again, because in the end, everyone betrayed her. After the creature finally faded into oblivion, she opened her eyes again and realized that she had definitely died. However, she did not understand how she was able to regain consciousness. And in general, she did not understand where she was walking around. There were some girls in very strange outfits and had rather unusual hairstyles. As soon as the girls who were in the room heard that she woke up, they immediately turned to her and, to her great surprise, called her a princess. Then the girl lowered her head down and saw that she had a completely unusual body. She found herself in the body of a baby and did not understand what was happening at all. She knew for sure that she had been shot, but she ended up waking up in some strange place that looked like a historical village. And besides, she was very outraged by the fact that she woke up in a very small and helpless body. The girl tried to say something, but she couldn't because she was a baby. When the dream bee realized that she made this very strange and unlike herself sound, she became scared, because she could masterfully control her emotions in any situation. She needed to assess the situation. She was killed by a junior member of the organization, but when she woke up, she became a baby with memories of her past life. There is a high probability that this could be called, in principle, a rebirth. I also understood in a dream that all these people called her a princess, and this meant that she was one. This means that in this life, she will be able to live happily without having anything to do with the murder. Of course, this understanding made her incredibly happy. After all, this is exactly what she wanted. But at that moment, a young girl suddenly approached her. She took the baby in her arms, and the girl immediately felt some kind of bad atmosphere. Everything around was very tense. At that moment, the woman suddenly laid her head back down on the bed. However, it was head down, and she buried her face right in the pillow. The girl began to worry a little, because if she was left like this, she would simply suffocate. But at that moment, the maid started talking. She said that a baby dies easily if they are simply placed face down. They wouldn't even have to get their hands dirty or come up with anything extraordinary. As soon as I heard this in a dream, I immediately understood what was going on. These girls were hired killers. She tried with all her might to turn over, and did not understand whether it was really true that, having been reborn in the first minutes, she was supposed to die again. The girl definitely couldn't let them win like that. She tried to calm down and came to the conclusion that in this state, she definitely wouldn't be able to turn over. She needs to push the blanket away with all her might and create space so she can breathe. The girl immediately started screaming and crying very loudly, so one of the maids simply had to pick her up because someone could hear them. While she was holding her in her arms, the dreamer calculated all the possible risks and found the ideal place to strike. That's exactly what she did. The girl hit the maid right in the face. The woman was Mrs. Chekve. Another maid took the child in her arms and asked her mistress if everything was all right with her. Dream B understood that if she continued to stay in this place, she would have to come up with a new plan. And in general, the girl was very irritated by the fact that she had to live in this life being connected to murders. She was the best agent, betrayed and killed by the people she trusted, and was reborn again. However, even she was unlucky here, because she was now an abandoned princess who was hunted by assassins. Soon B thought that the best way to save her would be to kill these people right now, so as not to worry about it later. However, she soon came to the very quick realization that she would not be able to do this, because in this body, she would not even be able to get out of bed. Sun B needed to come up with a new plan to get to these traitors. Chekve was hit pretty hard, so she sat there all this time and tried to come to her senses. But at that moment, her partner heard someone starting to walk towards them. They immediately wondered who it could be, but eventually they learned that it was His Majesty the King. In the end, everything immediately became more complicated at that moment. The girls began to panic, running from side to side and trying to calm down. As soon as Sunbai heard about the king, she realized that this guy who had just entered the room was the most important person in that place. He was a tall, dark-haired man who had beautiful, bright purple eyes. When the king entered inside, everyone immediately greeted him. The man then approached the lullaby and looked at B's dream. He asked if this was really the same child. The girls immediately said that everything was correct. And after that, for some time, he simply looked at her without taking his eyes off her. Son B was very wary. She did not understand why he looked at her like that, but since she was called a princess, this means that this man was her biological father. David was definitely no more than 20 years old. However, he had a rather handsome and even somewhat attractive appearance, so the girl thought that perhaps not all was lost. However, the man spoke up and called her ugly. He asked if all her children were really that awful. As soon as Sun B heard this, she became very upset. She didn't expect him to be so rude. This was, of course, very unpleasant for her. However, the man then looked intently at the child and said that, in addition to everything, it is very surprising that she does not cry. But the girl, of course, had no intention of showing a single tear in front of someone like him. You can't cry. It was a very familiar look, so she knew all the rules very well. He would definitely get rid of her, she cried. That's exactly what her intuition was screaming at her, so she wasn't going to give in to such provocations. When they were taught to kill children who cried in difficult situations and mercilessly threw them away, he had exactly the same look as the adults did back then. Then suddenly, one of the maids, smiling nervously, turned to the king and said that the princess apparently really liked him, since she didn't burst into tears. Of course, this was not so, but Sleep could not say anything because she was still very little. She just looked at him with her big purple eyes and did not even blink. The man asked where the maid had come to such a conclusion, since the girl hadn't even smiled. Sun thought that the king turned out to be much smarter than these court ladies, but then she remembered a very important point. They were hunting her. She really hoped that these girls were not going to try to kill her again when this man left, because the second time, she might not be able to escape. In that case, she was going to smile at this man, so that he would take her away from this place as soon as possible. The girl did just that. She really hoped that seeing her beautiful smile, he would actually do that. But the man was still dissatisfied. The king sighed heavily and said that, in the end, she only became uglier. The maid again made the assumption that since the girl was smiling at him like that, she definitely began to like him. And the man only thought that she had simply gone crazy. When Song Bi looked at the king, she realized that the look he had now was even worse, and she thought that it would be better if he continued to look at her with an incinerating gaze. That one was more pleasant. At that moment, another very noble person entered the hall. It was a young girl who, upon entering, addressed His Majesty. It was a remarkable lady. She greeted the king. The man also greeted her and asked what brought her here so unexpectedly. The girl asked for forgiveness, but said that when she heard the princess crying, she hurried into the room. However, the man had already arrived and calmed her down, so she made an unforgivable mistake. The king thought for a moment and asked, "Did she really think that a tyrant didn't know what fatherly love was?" Dama Go was very scared when she heard this. She understood that if she said a few wrong words, she could lose her life. The man tried to calm her down. He said that it was just a joke so that she wouldn't shake so much with fear. After this, he looked at these ladies of the court and asked whether it was true that they were not workers of this court. Madame Go replied that this was exactly the case. However, she had previously personally ordered them to serve the princess, so everything was fine. As soon as I heard this in a dream, I immediately realized that this lady was the one in charge of these murders. This means that she was the one who ordered her death. The girl would really like to talk to this man. However, due to the fact that she simply did not know how to talk yet, it was very difficult. Sunbi tried to cry and make some sounds so that he could hear her, but the king simply ignored her for a while and continued talking to the girl. He turned to the Lady Goy and said that he knew very well what was in her heart, even before the birth of the princess. So in the future, he would very much like her to personally look after her. He explained that the princess also needed someone to replace her mother. As soon as the girl heard this, she was sincerely surprised. She asked the man if he really wanted to say that he completely trusted her to raise the princess. Having heard this, Sun panicked even more. She didn't understand what this idiot was even saying, because this woman was trying to kill her. They continued talking to each other, and the girl tried to make sounds of her presence so that they would finally pay attention to her. Because the Sombe was still just a baby, and everything that had happened to her had only happened recently, her strength was already beginning to fade. The girl felt that she couldn't even cry properly, because she suddenly began to feel sleepy. Just a few hours ago, she was the best hired killer. However, now she could not even sleep normally for an hour. The girl was very upset because the baby's body turned out to be very weak. Some time passed since then, and she woke up from some noise coming from her room. She opened her eyes and immediately saw this Madame Go. She was very angry and said that now she would not be able to avoid meeting this idiot without killing her. She told the maids who were on her side that they had to get rid of her before the king arrived and asked what they should do now. At that moment, Chekwe was kneeling before her. She said that she had committed a mortal sin and therefore asked the lady for forgiveness and mercy. As soon as she heard and saw the dream, she was amazed. The girl clearly did not expect that this woman could beat a court lady with rods to such a state. Chekwe asked to be given another chance, and then she would be able to create another excuse, and would definitely do everything as needed. Madame Go ultimately spared her, saying that since she had already left like this, she would use it as an excuse to become the next queen mother at the right moment. The maid then finally stood up and asked what they should do with the princess now. The girl explained that until His Majesty gave the order, they would have to wait, and until then, they had to lock her in the farthest room of the palace and feed her just enough so that she would not die. Then Madame Go suddenly came up to her and put her arms around the baby's neck. She said that it was very amazing that this child really didn't shed a tear when all this happened. The woman turned to the baby and asked if you would cry on the day I become queen and you would die. She really would like to see this dream baby. Seeing her ominous look, realized that she was definitely going to kill her. But the girl, of course, could not allow this. She could, of course, try. If she could, however, the dream would survive in spite of them all, and prove that it was definitely impossible to kill her so easily. After everything calmed down, she decided to find out where she was, because this was important information. At first, she thought that she had simply found herself in the Joseon era, familiar to her from textbooks. But this place was very different from what the girl remembered. This place looks like a fictional historical novel, and it was customary for the king to personally give a name to every newborn child from the royal family, even if that child was from a concubine, and those who did not receive such a name were simply called abandoned. In turn, abandoned members of the royal family were either ignored or despised, and Sunbi was precisely that abandoned child. The king had not given the princess a name for a year, so the girl never received one and was abandoned. As soon as it became clear that she had been abandoned, the venerable Madame Go immediately locked her in the outbuilding. Thus the girl became simply a useless child. However, the dream was not going to give up so easily from the moment she got into this body. Several years passed, and now she was already 5. She lived an even more productive life than anyone else. Years ago, realizing that this life would not be smooth, she made one very important and colossal decision for herself. Dream B. She will never die, no matter how they try to kill her, and will definitely survive in this place. In her past life, she was used and killed. In this short life, it would definitely be very unfair. So the girl decided to change this order of actions. The dream could not continue like this any longer. She needed to regain the physical abilities she had in her past life, restore her strength, and escape from this terrible palace. The court lady Chewei was presented to her at the palace and was a loyal subordinate of the Honorable Lady Go. Following the concubine's orders, she took care of the girl just enough to ensure that she didn't actually die. It would have been very difficult for her to gain weight, as she was chronically undernourished. Also, because of her, she had to wear clothes that were too small for her and endure the piercing cold in the winter. Feeding a child once a day, sleep, of course, would not be considered normal if the food was also healthy and nutritious. But no, these were very small portions of spoiled, practically rotten food. In this case, Dream B will definitely not be able to show even half of the strength that she had in her past life. So one fine day, after a morning workout during which she fell many times, the girl decided that she needed to at least eat a little. She ran into the kitchen and turned to her sisters and asked what they were doing there. Her speech was still not very clear. However, at least she could already speak. Son B asked the maids to give her 1 current, but of course they couldn't do this. They immediately said that they didn't have any current for her. Son B made a very pitiful expression on her face and asked if they couldn't give her at least a few things. She really asked for it. In the end, the cooks simply couldn't resist. They actually gave her a wonderful dish and told her that she could eat to her heart's content. After such an active workout, the girl found this food even tastier than usual. So she was very happy that she was finally allowed to eat. Sun thought that if she ate well now, she might be able to repeat her workout and even increase the load. But at that moment, another mercenary entered their kitchen. It was the Chekfei court lady. Seeing them, she loudly shouted at the maids and asked how they dared to ignore the will of the honorable lady and give this girl extra food. Sonbi understood that the maid would now take these beautiful currants from her, so she was going to eat as many of them as possible, as quickly as possible. The girl quickly began to stuff the entire dish into her mouth at once. The maid tried to stop her and told her to spit it out, but Sleep, of course, did not listen and swallowed it all. The girl really hoped that everything would be okay with her, but in the end, because she secretly ate a little bit of electricity, she was locked in a room for a week. Of course, she lay in bed with her and Jam. However, this could not continue any longer. The girl had to become stronger as soon as possible in order to finally receive adequate treatment. She needed to find a place where she could train unnoticed. She had already been almost caught several times by the court lady Chewei, so she couldn't let that happen. Eventually, after walking around the outskirts of their territory, she found just the perfect place where she could hide and train in peace. It was perfect for her secret training. However, in the bushes nearby, the girl suddenly saw a bow and arrows. Of course, at that moment, she was beside herself with happiness. The girl couldn't believe her luck. For the last few years, she had somehow managed without weapons. However, now this would be an ideal opportunity for her. Dream B. She looked around and wondered if she could at least try to shoot once. Not seeing anyone near her, the girl still decided to do it. When she took it in her hands, she realized that it was too big for her. The wings were also incredibly tightly stretched, and at some point, she realized that she probably wouldn't be able to do anything normally. In the end, she saw that the arrow flew in a completely different direction and almost hit the king. When Psalm saw this, she was in a real panic. She understood that this could be very serious. At that very moment, many knights who were accompanying the king ran up to the girl and pointed all their weapons at her. She couldn't even stay on her feet and fell to the ground. The man came closer to her and told her to immediately answer who she was. His name was San, and he was a tyrant who would kill even his own blood relative if he didn't like it. This man also happened to be the biological father and current king of Joseon. She was very worried and didn't know what to do now. Should she tell the truth, or should she just somehow get out of this situation? The girl even thought about the fact that perhaps she could kill him. But then, looking into his eyes, she realized that with her current powers, she definitely would not be able to do this. And this saddened her. If everything had unfolded in her past life, it would still have been unknown who would have won this fight, so she certainly couldn't take any risks. For some time, the king simply looked at the girl. He had already begun to get angry because she still had not answered his question and asked if she was really going to remain silent until the very end. When she didn't respond to this again, he simply turned around and told his knights to simply kill her in that case, since she didn't carry any usefulness in herself. The girl was already thinking about saying something, but then suddenly she didn't have time, because one of the king's knights spoke. He asked for his forgiveness for disturbing her, but said that he had to interrupt him. The man explained that with all due respect, they could not kill her because this girl is the princess, the daughter of the late Queen Sohyun. As soon as San heard this, he immediately turned around and looked closely at this girl. Again, he could not believe that she really was a princess. Then he told everyone to put their swords back in their sheaths and asked the girl herself if she really was a princess. Sonbi was very happy that everything worked out by itself and said that she was a princess. Then the man sat down opposite her and asked why the princess was on his training ground. He couldn't understand it at all. The girl immediately stuttered from fear and said that she actually just thought that this was a place for games and decided that the onion could be her toy. The man, hearing this, stood up and said that, in fact, he had thought the same thing when he was a child, so he didn't scold her for it. Hearing this calmed her down a little because she already thought that he did not believe her. However, hearing this argument, she was very surprised. Moreover, she did not understand what kind of childhood he must have had. At that moment, Son came closer to her and took her in his arms. He suddenly lifted the girl up and looked straight into her eyes. Sonbi was very scared. She did not understand what was happening and why he suddenly decided to pick her up, although before that he had not shown any interest in her at all. Then the man suddenly took her from the place to the side and said that she was somehow too light. At that moment, the girl felt very dizzy. She did not understand what was wrong with the man and why he was doing all this. But then suddenly Sans spoke again and said that before she was just an ugly lump, but now she has grown up and has become quite tolerable in appearance. Now, when the girl looked into his eyes, she noticed that the intention that was visible in his pupils to kill her had disappeared, and this amazed her greatly. All these years he didn't come close, and now he suddenly started behaving so strangely. Of course, Sanbi thought that he was planning something malicious. So, I was going to be on my guard. The man put her on the ground and said that he heard that some people were saying that she was his daughter, because he was wondering if maybe she would like to tell him something. Hearing this, the girl was even more surprised. She didn't understand why he suddenly decided to talk to her at all. Then she suddenly suggested that perhaps he wanted her to change. Then she was going to show him the acting skills of her high rank, which had been honed over years of killing. Sunbei made an incredibly sad expression on her face. She put her small hand on his knee and asked if everything was okay with him. The man, hearing this, immediately asked what she meant. The girl then explained that she, without knowing it, had picked up a weapon that belonged to him, and because of this, he almost got hurt. The man suddenly waved his hand to the side and said that the most important thing was that she didn't hit him in the head, so she didn't have to worry. But Sanbi continued her speech. She said that she was still incredibly glad that he was not injured. She was very, very sorry that she had made such a terrible mistake, and was ready to promise that in the future she would try not to allow this to happen again. The man was completely indifferent to her tenderness. He only asked, in a rough voice, if she had finished her speech. He was already starting to get tired of it. Sanbi herself didn't like behaving this way. She said that, in fact, she always wanted to see him and learn a little more about him. The man, hearing about this, was very surprised and asked if she really wanted to see him. The children had never told him this before. He asked, "Really?" Even though he hadn't paid attention to her for so long, she still wanted it. Even though he was such an insensitive father who didn't even give her a name. Of course, Sanbi thought completely differently. However, she said that everything was exactly like that. The man was even more surprised. He asked why she had such feelings. The girl then smiled and reached out her arms to hug him and said that it was obvious because he was her dad. Son replied that everything was clear to him, after which he turned around and began to leave, saying that it was already time for him to go. Then, Sanbio was left alone, After he left, the girl was finally able to breathe calmly. After all, up until that moment, she practically couldn't even breathe because of fear. Fortunately, everything worked out. Now she definitely won't be able to deceive him so easily. The girl didn't intend to stay there anymore, so she decided to return back to the estate. She was also very happy that she had received information about the king in advance, but the problem was that she needed a place where she could train without attracting unnecessary attention to herself. As soon as she was about to return to her room, she heard the voice of Choi, who was constantly watching her. The maid approached the girl and, in a rough voice, told her to follow her immediately. The honorable lady immediately ordered the princess to be brought to her. When the girl noticed her facial expression, she noticed that something was wrong. It was completely different, even somewhat worried. Of course, Sanbi was very surprised to see him. She first met with the king, and now she also had to come to the lady. She didn't like it at all. So much stress in one day was too much. Eventually, soon, she was brought to the Chebahyun pavilion. Almost 3.5 years had passed since their last meeting, so the girl did not understand at all why the woman suddenly decided to invite her to her place. When the girl was already near the entrance, she suddenly heard a boy talking to her from behind and asking if she was the one who used the bow. She immediately turned around and looked back. She saw Prince Yan, who was 9 years old. He was dressed in a sports uniform and holding a wooden sword behind him. The boy looked straight at the girl and asked who she was. After all, he had never seen her before. Her maid, who was more like a supervisor, immediately greeted Prince Yan and bowed before him. The dream itself was surprised to see this man. She had not seen him since she moved into the extension. The boy then, alert, pointed the sword at her and said that he had asked her who she was. Accordingly, he expected answers from her. The maid immediately said that she obeyed and was ready to introduce the girl, but she did not have time to finish her sentence because the boy interrupted her. He suddenly pushed her aside and said that he actually didn't ask her about this, so he would ask her to just stand silently. Then Prince Yan took out his sword and pointed it straight at the girl. He told her to answer quickly. Was she really a murderer? He asked how she even dared to aim a bow at his father. What was her true goal? All this made him very wary, and he was ready to defend himself. The boy even imagined his wooden sword at her throat. She would have been very surprised by this, and would have been surprised by the fact that the rumors spread so quickly. There were also idiots like that in the assassin training camp who tried to show off their strength, which is exactly what Prince Yan did. It was very easy for her to deal with such people, so she did not hesitate for long and immediately decided to use her wonderful charm. Smiling happily, she turned to the boy and asked if it was true that he was her brother. I was not immediately surprised by this. His grip suddenly even weakened a little. The girl began to come closer to him and said that she would so like to see her brother every day, and gradually moved his wooden sword away from herself. The guy, hearing this, of course, was very surprised. Then she took his hand and said that she was so happy to finally meet her brother, whom she always admired. The girl started praising him and said that he turned out to be even cooler than she thought. This made Yana feel very uneasy. He shook his hand from her and told her not to touch him. He pushed her too hard, so the girl couldn't stay on her feet and fell to the ground. She hit her head and screamed loudly because she didn't expect it. The boy immediately became worried about her falling, and with a trembling voice, he said that he didn't want it at all. He extended his hand to her and asked if she could get up. He was really worried that he had hurt her something very badly. The girl was about to take his hand, but then a loud scream from Madame Go was heard before class. She asked what all the noise was going on outside, and the boy, of course, immediately became very scared. He quickly jumped away from the girl, and before leaving, said that she should keep all this a secret, but if she told anyone, he would really kill her. Her maid, meanwhile, said that they would already be coming in, since she had brought the princess as a mistress and asked for her. They eventually began to go inside, and the girl thought that she would finally see the venerable Madame Guo. When they went inside, the girl kept thinking about why this Madame Go called her, because it really was very strange and suspicious to some extent. Sonbi. When she went inside, she immediately bowed before her and greeted her. But the girl herself was unhappy to see this terrible woman. After all, it was she who wanted to kill her. The lady turned to the princess, and with a smile on her face, said that they had not seen each other for a long time as a mother. She could not help but rejoice at seeing how the girl was becoming more and more mature every day. Of course, these words were a lie, but the woman continued and said that she should under no circumstances turn a blind eye to the child's misdeeds. She couldn't just ignore this incident, and that's why she called the girl to her at that moment. A sly smile appeared on her face. It was clear that she was happy that the Sunbae made a mistake. The woman ordered the girl to stay in the outbuilding in the sea. However, the princess obeyed her words and caused some kind of commotion. She spoke impolitely to His Majesty and brought shame upon Madame Go. The girl said that she had arranged such an ophthalmically important time when His Majesty was supposed to go visit the grave of the previous king. That is why Madame Go believed that she needed to be properly punished. She asked why the princess looked so much like her low-born mother. For her, it was truly incomprehensible, because she believed that the girl should have learned a lesson from that woman. Sunbi, hearing that she had now begun to insult her parents, was not even surprised, but her patience had come to an end. She was no longer going to tolerate such things. Of course, the girl could calmly fight back. She carefully examined the work desk and looked at all the things that could be useful to her for a good blow. Even though she didn't have time to train properly, she could easily deal with this idiot. However, she doubted whether she could survive what she would do. The girl hadn't managed to do anything when a new maid knocked on their door. She apologized for disturbing her, but said that she had an urgent message. There was a court lady, Chokwe. She asked for forgiveness for disturbing her, but said that the king ordered the princess to be brought to him immediately. As soon as they heard this, they were very shocked. The girl did not understand at all why he decided to see Sunbi on the second day, but when the girl came to the king's office, she saw a multitude of different expensive sweets and snacks that she had only heard about before. It was all incredibly delicious. However, the girl did not understand why she was brought to the training ground at all. It was all suspicious. When the man saw her surprised and even upset expression, he thought that she did not like these treats, and he immediately asked if she would like to receive something else. If she did not like it, she called him dad and said that everything was fine, while he continued to feed her. After that, he said that he would like to start. The man noticed that the girl, like him, loved weapons. He immediately noticed this. Sunbi thought about what he wanted to do at that moment. I even showed her that he was going to kill her because the man somehow, very suspiciously, took the weapon in his hands and was determined to get closer to her. At that moment, arrows began to fly towards him from all sides, and the man could easily remove them. She could not believe that he could really defeat all these archers alone. At that moment, an arrow suddenly started flying towards her, and the girl thought that this would definitely be her end. She wouldn't be able to stop it in time and would simply die. But fortunately, this did not happen because the king stood right in front of her and covered her with his body. After which, he asked if she liked this kind of activity. He considered it very funny. Sunbi was sincerely amazed. She did not understand why he looked at her as if he was expecting praise, and this irritated her a little. Moreover, the girl did not understand how it could be fun at all. In the end, she lost consciousness due to being too nervous. Several hours passed from that moment. She opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. She counted the dragons that were depicted there and saw the king, that is, her father, not far from her. The girl did not understand where she was and why this man was next to her. It was all very strange, suspicious, and abnormal. At that moment, the man noticed that some extraneous sounds appeared. When he looked back, he saw that his daughter had already woken up, but in order not to talk to him, the girl closed her eyes again, pretending that she had fallen asleep. This surprised him a little. However, he came closer to her and put his hand on her head. In a quiet voice, he said that he knew she would like it, so he had nothing to apologize for. It was not his fault. Sun didn't understand what he was saying at all, because she could have easily died, and she was just lucky that she didn't. However, the man continued to stroke her head, and said that apparently it was too hard for her. She was still a little weak. The girl found all this very funny. She couldn't believe that he suddenly decided to play WhatsApp after ignoring her all these years. If you think about it, in her past life, she was not a cold-blooded killer. She always spared her family for her goals and her organization, which was very surprising. As an assassin, she tried her best to truly connect with people and wanted to truly trust them. But in the end, it just led her to death and betrayal from those close to her. When B saw the result of her trust in her dream, she decided that in this life, she would not trust anyone and would not save anyone. She would live only for herself, and taking into account only her own desires. She will never be the first to extend her hand towards this trembling one that lay on her head. The man was clearly worried, but the girls didn't care. She believed that she would never be able to do this, and did not see any point in it in principle. So, for the dream, all this sentimentality was useless. For this strange incident, the news that the king had visited her became quite a hot topic, and rumors spread throughout the estate. And unfortunately for Sonbi, she really found herself in the center of attention. The girl wanted to gather strength and escape, but now it was almost impossible. Many of the maids now treated her with respect, and even began to prepare various delicious treats for her to try. Now the girls had to meet the Dowager Queen, which was quite nerve-wracking. At the moment, she was a very important person. However, the most important thing was whether she would become the girl's ally or, on the contrary, her enemy. But when I was visiting her and tried her treats, I was delighted. They were truly delicious. The girl thought that for now, this woman would definitely be her ally. But then suddenly the grandmother turned to her and said that she heard that the king had recently visited the princess. She immediately realized that she had made the mistake of assuming that this woman would be on her side when she saw the surprised expression on her face. She had told the girl not to be so wary. She was just worried if everything would be okay with her. After all, if you think about it, she really should have arranged such a meeting even earlier. However, for some reason, she didn't do it. Then she turned to Lady Go, who was also present at this conversation, and asked, "Did the king really not say anything about the appointment of a new queen?" The girl immediately replied that she had not heard anything. Then the lady was very surprised because she thought that he, having shown interest in the princess, had changed his mind. But in the end, it turned out that he continued to leave the queen's place empty in such a turbulent time, and she clearly did not like it. In addition, the woman said that there are many rumors that the son of Grand Duke Kim Jong-seo is alive. But Madame Go was shocked to hear this suggestion, because she knew that Grand Duke Kim was supposed to be dead. The woman then explained that these were just simple rumors circulating in the markets. Some also said that Mr. Kim Chun-sol's son had survived and was planning to restore his dynasty. Their family has been raising the best swordsmen of Jongsan for generations, so if any of them did survive, it would definitely be a big problem for them. Therefore, the woman wanted them to hurry and take the place of the queen, strengthening their power as the support of this country. Madame Go, along with the remarkable Lady Huebin, had to make more efforts to win the heart of His Majesty, because it was very important. The woman also said that Madame Guo probably knows that the well-fed one who takes the place of the queen will become the crown prince of this entire country. The girl immediately felt her responsibility for all of this and said that of course she would try even harder not to let her down. Even though she had never met any of them before, it all seemed too familiar to her. And what surprised her was the fact that there was another prince. Also, if she wasn't mistaken, this prince is our son. The ladies' access to reading their Vibin, so the girls needed to find out who he really is. The girl knew that if he was even a little bit meddling, she had to lure him over to her side. However, first she needed to find other allies. Only when she decided to look for allies, she could not find anyone in this place. There was absolutely not a single person who could be with her. Som did not understand how it happened that as soon as she left the chambers of the Dowager Queen, all the ladies of the court simply disappeared. Then she came to the conclusion that their attitude towards her was still the same. The attachment of an abandoned princess stuck to her like a brand, and it would not be so easy to get rid of it. Then the girl suddenly thought about the name Kim Jong-seo and realized that this was definitely a historical figure, and she had heard it somewhere before. However, this Joseon was different from what she knew from history, and what most confused her was the phrase, "The family raised the best swordsmen of Joseon from generation to generation." Songbi still couldn't understand why these words were so familiar to her. But as soon as she started heading to her room, she suddenly saw one of the maids, who said that they needed to quickly run to the hospital. The girl immediately became wary. She was curious about what had happened there. At some point, she even thought that someone had gotten hurt during training. She really wanted to know, so she went to the door and looked in there. And there she saw Prince Yan. The boy stood in the middle of the training field with a ball in his hands. He was very angry and shouted loudly. He said that despite the fact that his older brother was a good student in fencing, he would never be able to cope with him. Then the dream B looked at another boy who was sitting on the ground and holding his hand to the ram's place from where a lot of blood was flowing. She realized that since Prince Yan called him elder brother, this child was Prince Song. It was a dark-haired, rather tall guy who had beautiful blue eyes. He was about 10 years old at the time, and Yan said that it was all his fault. He recklessly attacked, and in the end, got what he deserved. Song B immediately figured out this situation. They fought, and even with the use of a real sword, and because of this, one of them was quite seriously injured. This was really very reckless and stupid, in her opinion. However, then, she suddenly noticed that the wound was on the forehead. She had definitely seen a similar scene before. However, it was difficult for her to remember all of this. Then, she began to remember some fragments of the phrase that was now spinning in her head after she saw this wound. To become an assassin in her past world, you had to not only master excellent killing techniques, but also to have extensive knowledge in a wide variety of fields. And although the girl was very successful in everything, there was only one thing in which she was inferior to everyone else. And it was reading a novel that she knew absolutely nothing about love. So one of her colleagues advised her to read a virtual novel. He thought that this would really help her. He gave her his phone number and asked her to try reading it at least once. He would not insist anymore. Now, Song B remembered that it was a novel written by his younger sister, and the whole story was exactly like in that novel. This realization amazed her madly, because it was the only romance novel that she had ever read in her life, and not even by her own will. The main thing is that the hero was the son of Kim Jong-so. He was born with the talent of the best swordsman of Joseon. He was taken in by a noble lady and Prince Suyan, and grew up to be a real killer. However, the heroine is the source of all evil, and she fell in love with the main character. She got rid of Prince Suyan. And after the swordsman made her queen. Then the dream would have made me think about who she was in this story. She was definitely not among the main characters. The girl tried to think about who she could be in this story, and remember everything. And finally, she remembered a very important moment. In the original novel, when the prince and the elephants were dying, the princess appeared and asked for help. At the age of about 10, at the beginning of the novel, while Prince Suyon was dealing with Prince Sunam, the girl died at the hands of the protagonist. Now everything became clear to her. She was the very character who dies at the very beginning, so she practically didn't remember him, but she didn't understand how this was possible and why she was so unlucky. Song B, of course, did not intend to die. After all, she had just been reborn in a new world, so she needed to come up with her own plan to avoid death. She was about to turn 6 years old, which meant she would die in about 4 years. However, she will never die. The girl will do everything in her power to prevent this, and even though this is a novel, she will never allow herself to be killed again. To begin with, in order to avoid such a fate, she was going to draw up a detailed plan of action. She believed that it was certainly possible to escape from this place before she reached the required age, but the chances of survival were too small, so she immediately discarded this option. The only plan that had any chance of success was for her to stay there and change the course of the original plot. In order to change this course, she knew that Korolov had to become Prince Sonam and not Yang. Therefore, the next day after she learned all this information, the girl went out to simply observe his actions. The first thing Sonam did after waking up was go to the training field. He told his coach that he would be training alone that day, so he asked that no one follow him. The girl immediately concluded that he was more stubborn than she thought. She thought that he was wounded and would not even be able to move. However, in the end, he even wanted to train, and on his own. She suggested that perhaps he even had some kind of secret place for training, which is why he wanted to go there himself. Dream B. She decided to follow him and check what he was hiding, so she believed that she could find out a little more about him, and this would help her in the investigation. So she followed him and ended up somewhere in the depths of the forest. The girl did not understand why he came there at all. It was very strange and suspicious. The ladies of the court said that one should not enter this place because wild animals lived there, and therefore it was very dangerous, especially for children. Son B was very interested in what he had in mind in this case. At that moment, the boy suddenly pulled his sword closer. After that, he took a stone from the ground and threw it somewhere to the side. At that moment, a huge wolf appeared right in front of him. The animal immediately paid attention to him and was ready to eat him. The girl then thought that for some reason he himself provoked this situation and did it on purpose. This boy seemed very weak in appearance. However, the girl suggested that he might be stronger than she thought. The guy was about to hurt the wolf, but he couldn't even stay on his feet. He accidentally fell to the ground and dropped the weapon from his hands. She absolutely did not understand where he could get such self-confidence from, because he couldn't even stand on his feet properly. Then, she suddenly remembered a phrase from this novel and realized that perhaps he suffered from this wolf and could not walk normally, which is why he lost to Prince Yan. Of course, Sleep Bee could not allow this, given the fact that she needed to change the plot of the novel. She intervened in this situation. The girl whistled loudly and began to attract the attention of the wolf, who had already come very close to the boy. As soon as Sunam saw what she was about to do, he immediately tried to stop her. He told the girl that it was very dangerous and asked her not to take such a risk. But she was confident in her abilities and decided that it was not dangerous at all. She just needed to dodge in time so that this wolf would crash at full speed into the rock that was behind her. She had already thought everything out in advance, and in the end, after everything was done, she was glad that everything worked out. In fact, Sonbi was going to deal with him when the prince escaped. However, nothing can be done. The survival of the prince is more important to Sonamna than hiding her ability. Yes, the girl took it apart with ease, and with this animal, the boy looked at her in surprise and asked in a trembling voice how she did it at all, because he definitely would not have thought of such a thing. She decided not to reveal all her cards at once. She pretended that she didn't understand anything and asked what was wrong. Of course, this made the boy incredibly angry. He said that she had no right to pretend that she didn't understand anything, because she had just easily dealt with this huge wolf. Tsunami also wanted to know who she was at that moment. The girl was worried because now she began to have real problems and dilemmas. She understood that she was in deep trouble. Complete distrust was already written on his face, but she needed a completely different effect. Then she suggested that perhaps she should mix a little truth with a lie. So the girl was about to explain the situation, but didn't even have time to say a word. And all because he screamed at her and called her a killer. He said that she was a killer like he had never seen before, and asked if she really thought that he would fall for her baby face. He had already stood up, and, continuing to point his finger at her, asked what she was planning. He was very serious. He told her to go with him, and after the interrogation, he would figure out what to do with her. At that moment, for some reason, he felt very ill and lost consciousness. When the girl saw this, she was very shocked. She did not understand what was wrong with him. He just fell straight into her arms. Sunbi didn't understand that there was something wrong with him at all, and didn't know how she could even make this idiot a king. At that moment, it seemed unreal to her. Eventually, after all this happened, rumors began to spread around the estate. The maid said that Prince Sonam was able to defeat the wolf with one blow and save the abandoned princess, risking his own life in the process. When the boy heard all these rumors, he didn't understand why they were saying such things and where they came from, because he knew that everything was wrong. After he felt better, Son decided to visit him. She introduced herself and, smiling happily, said that she decided to visit her sick brother. She sat down next to him and asked how he was feeling. The boy saw her and immediately got angry. He wanted to say something but didn't have time. The dream said that she was his sister whom he saved, but the man did not understand what she was saying. After all, it was she who defeated the wolf, and he did not know why she was now giving him such glory. She continued to insist that it was he who defeated that terrible wolf. She pretended to be a small, ignorant child. His expression told her a lot. It looked like he was still confused, and that's why he didn't even say anything to her. It was a very lucky dream for her. She said that as a sign of gratitude, she would like to do something. Meanwhile, she crawled closer to him and asked him to order everyone to leave the room. At first, the boy did not understand what she meant, but soon he ordered the servants to leave. He told them that he and his sister had an important conversation. So they left with me. I was very pleased when I saw this. Then he looked at the girl and asked her to now explain everything normally, what was going on and why she behaved this way. She asked if he remembered the rumors that were circulating in the palace. Thanks to him, the ministers were making noise that her brother was the future crown prince. As soon as the guy heard this, he was very shocked. He said that he had not defeated the wolf. He did not want to engage in such a low matter as appropriating other people's merits. He really didn't understand why he should do this after that. He assumed that the girl was still a killer. Of course, she was very angry because he continued to insist on his own, although she had already said more than once that this was all untrue. She had been on the brink of death so many times that she had to somehow make this man her ally. So it took her some time to come up with a new plan. Sonbi turned to him and said that she was very offended by the fact that he called his younger sister a murderer. As soon as the guy heard this, he was very shocked. He was not yet used to the fact that she called him sister, but the Dream Bee moved closer to him and said that she saved his life when he almost died. Therefore, she was very upset that he considered her a murderer. The man thought about it and said that she was indeed right. With a heavy sigh, Sonam said that she was his savior. However, he did not understand how a 5-year-old girl could defeat that wolf. The girl simply said that it was a talent. She was like her father, who, as a child, caught tigers with his bare hands. The man could still assume that this could be considered the correct answer. However, he asked how she would explain the fact that she was behind his back, but the girl smiled and replied that this place was behind the extension. She accidentally saw her brother heading there and followed him. Sonbei explained that she was worried that it might be dangerous there, so she decided to help him if necessary. The boy suggested that perhaps this could be considered a normal answer, but he was interested in the fact why she had now asked all the servants to leave. The girl replied that she had a secret proposal for him. She really wanted him to listen to her carefully and think about it carefully. Songbi said that she could make her brother the support of this country and really hoped that he would cooperate with her. The boy was surprised and asked how she was even going to make his supports, because he still didn't believe that such a small child like her was capable of anything more. The girl smiled and said that everything was very simple. Brother should have become her student, and then everything would have definitely worked out for them. At that very moment, Choi called Madame Go to her. She was going to scold her for this terrible offense that the woman had committed. She threw a plate at her and asked how she dared to do such a thing, lowering her head to the very bottom and asking the lady for a simplification. She said that she had no idea that when the girl visited the training ground, she would meet Prince Sanat. Madame Go said that all sorts of scoundrels were already talking about the fact that the Prince of Elephants was the future crown prince. So she was very surprised by the fact that the girl did not know anything about it. Chekve immediately started screaming. She said that she had committed a mortal sin and was somehow ready to fix everything. At that moment, the lady stepped on her hand and said that she was ready to give her another chance. The girl had to teach her a proper lesson. Madame Go wanted the girl to no longer dare to go outside the annex and not to behave as she pleased. She had to follow their strict and cruel rules. She also warned that if the woman couldn't handle it, then next time she would definitely kill her. So she wished her luck. When evening came, the guy was sitting in his room. He was already feeling a little better. He was studying one of the books. However, he still couldn't concentrate on the text. Then the guy put it aside and thought about the conversation with his sister that he had a few hours ago. When the girl told him her conditions, he asked how she, being such a little girl, could so boldly talk about the throne so frivolously, and, what's more, want to take him as her student. Sonbi took his hand and said that he could definitely not doubt her. She really hoped that he would believe in her and that she could make him king. She was ready to keep her word. However, the boy pulled his hand away, thinking that she was just a 5-year-old girl, so he did not understand how he could count on her. But when she dealt with that huge wolf, she moved as if she had undergone real professional training, and this surprised him even more. He believed that there was something definitely not clean there. However, how could she, who did not belong to the family of the Grand Duke Kim Jong, have such a wonderful talent? Unfortunately, he also did not understand this. In fact, the best swordsman of Joseon was born only once in a generation, and for 5 generations in a row, they were born in the Kim family. However, now the Kim line was interrupted, and Somnet suggested that perhaps this could mean that this girl is the best swordsman of Joseon, and she was born in this generation. And compared to her, the guy was just a mediocrity. He remembered how he lost to his younger brother in battle and how he mocked him. Yan did not understand how he could protect even his own body, and even more so if he could not do this. And how was he going to protect the people? In what condition is he? He will never be able to defeat even his own brother. Moreover, behind his great back stands the great chancellor, who possessed very great power. Some believed that whether he became the crown prince or not, his life would still be in great danger, and this definitely could not be changed. In that case, he needed to at least gather strength to protect at least himself. He ordered his assistant to secretly watch this girl for several weeks. He also asked that his assistant be sure to report to him about all new knowledge. The man bowed and said that he understood everything. The next day, she suddenly woke up and felt a very strong cold. She did not understand why this was, but when she went to bed, everything was fine. When the girl woke up, she realized that for some reason, she didn't have a blanket on. She began to think that perhaps she was so tired that she even forgot to take it out. But when the girl approached the special closet in which she kept it, she did not see the blanket there. It simply was not there. Sonbi was very angry. She did not understand what was happening at all. She was going to open the door in order to go out and check what was there, but she couldn't. For some reason, it was locked. There was not even anyone near her, and she would have thought that perhaps these were checks by the court Lady Chekve and the Honorable Madame Go. She tried to avoid their notice as much as possible lately. However, now the situation has changed, and the dream could change, because she had already endured a lot of things before. So soon, she was going to take revenge on this terrible Choi, so that she would remember this revenge forever. When several hours had passed, the Czech lady finally came to the lady. She opened the door for her and held a small plate with her breakfast in her hands. Having entered, the maid asked forgiveness for being late, and also asked how the girls had been living in captivity for all these few days. Son B, who was sitting in the very corner of the room, was shaking all over from the cold. She covered herself with a curtain that she had taken down from the window, and with an ominous smile, she said that it had been very cold in the last few days. So she was really curious how the girl had held out. When Choi came closer to her, she said that she looked more resilient than she thought. She thought that the girl would cry, and in the end, she didn't even say a word. After that, she threw a plate of soup in front of her and told her to eat quickly. Otherwise, if she died, she would have big problems, and she didn't want that. Chekwe also demanded that the girl promise that she would never again appear near members of the royal family. She also added that if the girl promises this, then from today she can give her the blanket back again. In fact, the maid was incredibly happy. After all, this is exactly what she expected from the child. As soon as she was lured with food, she immediately succumbed to these provocations. However, everything did not turn out as she expected. This is because the dream had its own character. She threw this bowl of soup right in the face of the court lady. The girl immediately screamed loudly because the soup was warm. It even hurt her. She immediately asked the girl what she was doing, but the dream would answer that she could endure both the cold and loneliness. However, she certainly did not intend to tolerate tasteless food. The girl immediately yelled at her and asked how she dared to do such a thing. Of course, she was already very shocked by her impudence. But the girl interrupted her and asked how the lady-in-waiting could dare to abandon her member of the royal family and keep her in captivity in such terrible conditions. Besides, Sonbei said that she was embezzling money from the royal treasury, so this should definitely have been punishable. When the maid heard this, she was very shocked, and with a trembling voice immediately asked how the girl could know about this, since she had carefully hidden it. But the girl replied that perhaps she was still very young and did not know all the laws and rules. But for some reason, she was absolutely sure that her actions were contrary to these rules. The dream warned the woman that in the future she would have to suffer severe punishment for all the terrible things she had done. Chekve, hearing this, became a little wary. She tried not to show that she was scared, and asked what such a little girl like her could do to her. But the dream would answer that the woman would live a miserable life in Cha until the end of her days, and she would regret more than once what she had done. Chekve started to leave the room. She didn't understand how the girl could know so much, but she decided that staying there wouldn't be the best idea. Eventually, the lady of the court realized that the girl was not so simple, and she needed to quickly report all of this to Madame Go. At that moment, she had already opened the doors to leave. However, she couldn't, because right in front of her a multitude of knights appeared who were ready to arrest her. Sonbi yelled at this lady and said that she would be arrested immediately because she had broken a lot of rules. Of course, the maid started screaming. She asked to be released immediately because she had done nothing wrong. While she was being taken away, she tried to resist, but of course, she failed, because the knight obeyed orders. Sunbae, seeing how she was able to deal with her huge problem, was very happy. It was really very important for her. At that moment, a crumpled man suddenly came up to her. He said that everything was fine, that it ended this way. The girl looked at him, smiled, and said that it was all thanks to him. She was truly very grateful for the fact that he helped her like this. The day before, Somnemu had learned this incredibly important information from his assistant. The man told him that the princess had been in a separate pavilion for the second day already, and the ladies of the court who had been presented to her were nowhere to be found. The girl was completely alone at that moment, of course, and Somnet was very shocked to hear this. He did not expect that someone could do this to the princess. Then, thinking, the guy said that the management of a separate pavilion is in the hands of the court ladies from the Chibuhim pavilion. After this, he realized that most likely these were all terrible tricks of the honorable madame, and it was she who made it so that the princess was completely alone. His assistant also found out that she had been locked up for several days before, and this had happened more than once. The guy, hearing about this, became very angry. He did not understand how it was possible for a small child to act like that, since the girl was not even 5 years old. His assistant then asked what the gentleman was going to do. Did he really want to leave everything like this? Somnit, of course, said that he could not leave it all like that. Only the king could decide the fate of the abandoned member of the royal family, but it was still not within his competence. This was the law for members of the royal family. However, he certainly did not want to follow it. He was going to help the poor princess, because she was part of their family. After everything was over, Somnet decided to visit the girl in a separate pavilion where she lived. If his guesses were correct, then at that moment, there should have been no one there except him, and that is why he decided to come with his assistant to visit her. As soon as the guy went inside and saw a dream, Tom greeted her, but the girl did not understand why he decided to come to her now. The man, seeing that she was eating something, smiled and said that, fortunately, the ladies of the court apparently brought her food. But the girl replied that this was not at all the case. She brought it herself. The boy did not understand how this was even possible because he had to break into this place by breaking the lock of a tightly locked window. So he did not understand how she could get out on her own. Sanbai told him her secret. She simply had a small thing that she inserted into the lock and thus was able to open it. But he didn't understand whether it was really possible to open it all that easily, since he himself had seen how the ladies of the court made sure that everything was securely locked when they left. The girl replied that she opened it herself, and then showed him a small thin needle with which she did just that. Of course, he didn't believe her. However, the girl demonstrated it to him again, and then he was very amazed that she really was able to open this strong lock with just one needle. After that, he realized that she was a completely unusual child. He now considered her a thief. Dream B. Having heard about this, she was very surprised. She said that of course it was not true, and after that she asked how he himself entered through the window. The guy explained that he came to check if everything was okay with her, and to take certain measures. If he had been careless, he could have provoked the lady. Of course, the girl was very surprised when she learned that he decided to help her, even though he himself could have gotten into very big trouble. At that moment, the frowning guy replied that he did not do this for her sake at all. It was simply against his princes to ignore such unfair things. And that's why he did it. He thought it was right, and would have done it again if he had to. Sun B thought that it was very nice of him to do that, and even though he was speaking very old-fashioned words, it was still nice. She immediately said that he had come to save her, and gave the example of the situation with the wolf. After which, she added that, in this, he was no inferior to a real ruler. However, to become a wise ruler, one needs strength that would be able to lead the people and protect them. So she asked him again the same question as a few days ago. Was he ready to become her student? To stop him from doubting, the girl said that, as he could already notice, she had quite a lot of talents, so she would definitely have something to teach him. Sumtit really thought that this was a ridiculous proposal. Before, however, perhaps the girl would be a breakthrough for him, since he had hit a wall in martial arts. However, before he agreed to ask her one more question, of course, the dream was ready to answer it, because she knew that it would be a profitable offer. Then the boy asked what benefit she would get from all this. The princess thought for a while, but eventually decided to tell him the truth. She replied that, once upon a time, the venerable Madame Go had said that she would kill her. The girl didn't know the exact reasons at all. However, Madame had been chasing her for VIP since her birth, and therefore her motive was clear. No matter what talents the girl possesses, if an order about the nut comes from Han's dream, it will be simply impossible to escape. She will be doomed. When the boy heard this, he was very angry and asked if all this was really true. The girl replied that this was exactly the case, and she had not lied to him at all. She told her brother that she just wants to live a normal life as a person. She doesn't need power or wealth. She just doesn't want to die. Sighing heavily, Somnet said that he was ready to at least try to do this. Of course, the princess, hearing about this, was immediately happy. However, he said that for someone who cannot live an ordinary life as a human being, she eats too many exquisite sweets, and this amazed him. He was also very interested in how great her talent was, although it was not perfect. However, he was ready to do everything possible to become her most diligent student. And he proved it when he kicked out Madame's covers. The guy said that he simply acted as he thought was right, and not as a student who cannot abandon his teacher in trouble. Thus, the minor character who was supposed to die in the first scene of the original, and the man she would make king of this country in the future, became her student. However, the Dream Bee considered all this very suspicious. Everything began to go too smoothly for her, and accordingly, she was a little worried about it. Ultimately, from that day on, public opinion of the princess on me improved significantly. People around the estate began to spread more positive rumors and began to believe that he was definitely worthy of taking the place of Crown Prince. To some extent, he even had a small fan club. Many ladies of the court watched his every action and considered him incredibly cute. In general, the number of supporters in the palace increased, which was definitely very good for both Sunba and for the boy himself. But lately, things had been going too smoothly. So this, of course, worried the girl a lot. She was always expecting some kind of catch. While the girl was walking around the backyard of her outbuilding, a pretend lady suddenly approached her. She had been looking for her everywhere, so she was very angry when she found her after so much time. Sun was a little worried. From her appearance, it was clear that the woman was very serious, so she immediately asked what happened. The maid then replied that Madame Go wanted to see her. When they came to her chambers, she was very worried about the dream. She certainly knew that sooner or later the woman would call her to her. However, she did not expect that it would happen so quickly. The Chekve court lady was kicked out for a good reason, so she knew that Madame Goni would have to make too much of a fuss about it. When the girl came to her, she immediately greeted her and was interested in what she wanted from her. Madame Go said that it had been a long time since she had seen the princess, but she had only just arrived. The woman was very irritated and told the girl to sit down quickly. She wasn't going to beat around the bush. She wanted to tell her everything straight out, so she looked the girl straight in the eyes and asked a really direct question. Madame Go asked if she was involved in the fact that the Chekve court lady was kicked out. Sung was a little worried, but she pulled herself together and said that it was the punishment her brother had endured after learning about the crimes of the court lady. The woman, having heard about her brother, immediately became thoughtful after this. She asked the princess if she knew why she was an abandoned member of the royal family. Without waiting for an answer from her, she immediately said that this was all because she was not recognized as a member of the royal family. The fact that she called Prince Somnam her brother was completely unethical. When the girl heard this, she was shocked. She didn't think that the woman would now start to cling to her because of some formalities. When there was a short silence between them, the girl realized that she had to say something, so she bowed and asked for forgiveness. Despite the fact that she did it, she actually didn't feel the least bit sorry at that moment. Madame Go put aside the brush she had been drawing something on the paper all this time. She told the princess that the Chekwe court lady was her very devoted person. She was like this orchid that is always next to her. And in this harsh palace, she was one of the few whom a woman could truly trust. However, now she could no longer do anything near the princess. Her roots rotted, so they had to just get rid of her after that. Madame Go suddenly took out some very strange thing and addressed the girl in a more serious voice. She asked if the princess knew that the weeds could even ruin the entire harvest. Madame Go also believed that the princess, who clung to the palace like a parasite, was very similar to them. Then the girl realized that Madame Go believed that she was the one behind all these accusations, even though it was Prince Somnam who made the verdict. But without evidence, she definitely couldn't accuse her. So the girl smiled, made an innocent expression on her face, and asked, Is it really good that these weeds looked like her? After all, she was now just a little child who didn't know anything, so the girl was going to stick to this same image. Madame Go, hearing this, immediately laughed, and then said that the princess did not receive a proper education, so of course she did not know the word weed. She apologized for using such a complex word, then explained that a weed is something useless, and to get rid of something like that, you need to use a strong poison. At that very moment, she took the ink and splashed it straight into the princess's eyes. The girl immediately began to wipe them away. However, it was difficult to do. Zonbi tried to stay calm. She knew that she shouldn't panic. Madame Go, meanwhile, asked if the girl now knew what the word weed meant. Of course, the princess was not going to tolerate such humiliation any longer. She could have killed this terrible woman in just 3 seconds. However, unfortunately, she was unable to do so. All because the maids suddenly ran into Madame Go's room. They turned to her and asked what she was doing. The woman explained that the princess was playing with her brush and her hand slipped, causing a similar accident. In fact, the Dowager Queen also came in with the maids and shouted at us, Madame Go, and asked why she had lied to her. Of course, she understood that all this was not true, because if it had been as Madame Go told, then the girl definitely would not have been lying and trembling, afraid to raise her head on the earth. The young girl ran up to the princess and tried to wipe the ink from her eyes. She asked if everything was okay with her, and if she felt any pain anywhere. The Dowager Queen continued to scream. She said that the princess was not just an abandoned member of the royal family. The king had shown interest in her for the first time since her birth. That's why she was this princess. And the remarkable Madame Go apparently didn't understand this, and because of this, decided to throw a tantrum out of nowhere. Madame suddenly looked very serious, and turned to the queen in a rough voice, and said that the king had given her all the powers to raise the princess. So no one could interfere with the princess's upbringing except herself. The queen was not going to tolerate such treatment. So she approached the girl and hit her very hard on the cheek for such rudeness. She shouted at Madame Go and said that the girl was very much mistaken about this. In fact, before going to the ritual in honor of the ancestors, the king ordered Habib to look after the princess. Madame did not understand when she heard this. She did not believe that this could be true. The Dowager Queen interrupted her and said that His Majesty's decision was correct. Recently, she had heard rumors about the suspicious actions of her pretended lady, and she had decided simply. The young girl, who was next to the princess, apologized for interrupting the queen and asked if she could take the princess and leave them. The girl said that she would like to be examined by doctors as soon as possible, because this ink could have gotten into some pretty important places. The woman didn't pay any attention to her and told her to act as she saw fit. After this, the young girl took the princess by the shoulders and said that it would be best for them to leave the dream. She was very shocked by what she heard. Soon after the doctor examined her, they came to the bathroom, and the maid brought the mistress everything she asked for. The young lady thanked her and said that she could leave them and go, after which the girls were left alone. In fact, this ink was really very dangerous, because of it, she could barely open her eyes. They were all stuck together. The young girl felt sorry for the princess. She said that at first she was going to wash her face, and she also felt very sorry that the girl had to go through all this. In fact, it was Prince Somdam's biological mother. Her name was Hong Habib, and compared to that venerable lady, her influence in the palace was simply insignificant. And besides, her health was very weak from birth, so she became famous for not leaving even her chambers. So the Dream Bee was very shocked that such a person suddenly stood up for her. After he rubbed her eyes, she asked if the princess could now see a little better. The girl, of course, thanked her and said that she felt better now. The princess knew the prince's character very well, so he would definitely not ask his mother for help. So she asked why the girl brought her to this place. Hong was seriously worried. She asked if the girl was really against this dream. Of course, she said that it was not so. She just did not understand. After all, the woman had no reason to save her. When the woman heard this, she was very shocked and immediately asked why she thought so. Sonbi replied that this was all because she was the nameless, abandoned princess, and no matter what they did to her, it certainly would not be considered a violation of the law, because she was simply a nobody. But Hong replied that this had nothing to do with the laws at all. She took the princess by the hands and replied that protecting the child was a completely natural thing to do. Of course, the girl was shocked when she heard this, because there was nothing natural in this world. People lived to survive and earn money. All people in the world act based only on their own interests. This is what it meant to be human. The girl learned this lesson from her past life. Therefore, the Dream Bee said that she still did not understand why the woman made such a decision. For her, this was not a sufficient argument. Hong suddenly asked the princess to extend her palm to her for a few seconds. The girl did so, after which the woman smiled happily. The woman then replied that she too once had the same small hands as the princess. However, now they had become much larger. At that moment, she put her palm to hers. Hong said that this was all because someone protected her hands until she grew up, and the woman really hoped that one day she would be able to protect someone too. And besides, the princess was not just an abandoned princess, but the only daughter of the late Queen Sahyeon, whom she protected at the cost of her own life. She said that the girl was her only precious daughter in this whole world, and therefore it was incredibly sad for her to leave him, knowing that sleep would remain there herself. The princess, hearing all these words, felt a very strange feeling. She did not understand what was happening to her and could not explain it in any way. Because of this, she was very scared. But they didn't have time to finish their conversation because a maid entered the room and had just prepared water for washing. Hanyo smiled happily and asked the maid to take care of the princess. After that, the court lady took the girl and took her to another room. But before leaving, the sunbae looked at this woman and realized that this was the first time someone held her hand. Because of this, she still had strange sensations. Neither in her past life nor in this life had anyone held her hand. It was a very new feeling for her. However, she felt good. When some time had passed since then, the girl took a bath and put on a new outfit. She immediately came to hot. When the woman saw her, she was very surprised. The princess, of course, was immediately worried that she looked strange or that something was wrong. But in fact, the girl looked very cute, and the woman told her so. They began to give her many compliments. Then one of the ladies of the court brought her a small mirror so that she could also look at herself and make sure that their words were true. Sonbi looked at herself in the mirror and was very amazed. She couldn't even believe that it was really her. It was the first time she had been treated in such a polite manner. It was the first time she had washed herself in warm water and worn such jewelry and clothes. So all of this was very strange for her. At that moment, she suddenly noticed that the small butterfly that was attached to her sleeve had randomly fallen off. Sun was very worried. She didn't know what to do. The decorations that were glued to her fell off, and now she felt guilty. The woman immediately calmed her down and said that there was nothing wrong with it. She took the butterfly and offered to glue it back on herself. She glued the decoration back on her and said in a gentle voice that if she had a daughter, she would want to braid her hair beautifully and decorate it like that. For her, this would be the greatest happiness. Then the dream began to think about the fact that this was really the first time that someone braided and touched her hair. She had mixed feelings. She didn't even know how to describe it all. In the end, she thanked the woman for this and thought about the fact that for the first time in one day, so many new things had happened that it even scared her. But at that moment, a maid came into the room and told the mistress that since the princess was dressed so beautifully, they could go to the gazebo, and the maids would prepare some good snacks for them in the meantime. The girl, who thought about it, finally agreed with her. She said that since the weather was warm and the princess was really dressed wonderfully, they could make it happen. But of course, she asked what the princess thought about it. Hong replied that they could go to the gazebo and split the price there, have leisurely conversations all day long, and of course, eat a lot of delicious things. Then suddenly the girl thought and realized that this was a really great opportunity for her to get closer to Khabib, so she could not refuse. She needed to find out as much as possible about this woman information. This is very good, and the walk was even better. So in this way, she could get double benefit for herself. But at that moment, when they were about to leave, the dreamer looked towards the window and had a clear feeling as if someone was watching them. But she did not see anyone there. She assumed that most likely it was just her imagination, but at that moment, she didn't even suspect that this was not the case at all and that she was right from the start. In fact, a young blonde guy was watching them from the window. He immediately hid after the dream bee looked out the window. He couldn't believe that a little girl could notice his master of disguise. It was really amazing. Of course, the man didn't want to believe it, and therefore simply assumed that it was his imagination. To begin with, he was going to return to Madame Go in order to report everything to her. And the princess and Hong finally reached the beautiful place where the gazebo was located. When she saw him in the dream, she was amazed by such beauty. She had never seen it before. So, she told the woman that she liked everything very much. The woman said that she was happy that she liked everything. And after that, she asked if she would like to eat what they took with them. She was already very hungry, so she did not refuse. The girl stepped away for a moment to bring the food, and the princess looked around and noticed how calm the atmosphere was around. She really liked it all very much before. When she secretly looked at this place from afar, she didn't even notice that up close it could seem so beautiful. When Madame Hong finally set the table, she called the princess to her place. The girl immediately ran and was ready to try their wonderful delicacies. The girl thought that since they had brought a lot of this decoration on their walk, it was simply wonderful because she would finally be able to eat her fill. Dream Bee immediately started with her favorite sweet, and noticed that she had not felt such peace as in this place for a long time. Thanks to that terrible madame, she was finally changed and even fed very tasty food. Therefore, to some extent, she was happy that something like this happened to her. But then suddenly, the girls who were sitting not far from a small house located to the side heard some kind of scream from there, Dream Bee. She was immediately very surprised because she thought that they were alone there, so she asked Mrs. E who they were shouting about. Well, having looked more closely, she saw the somnambulist who was doing so. The woman also recognized her son and was proud of him. He explained to the princess that that day was the day of the audience with his mentor. After the appointment of the crown prince was postponed, the scholars of the court held audiences with all possible candidates. Dream Bee smiled happily and said that her brother was an incredible fellow, and she was truly happy that everything was going well for him. Han was also very happy, but she said that he was the son whom she, as incompetent and dragging him down, did not deserve. When the girl heard these words, she was very angry. She did not understand what the woman was saying, and most importantly, why. The woman was clearly uncomfortable with this conversation because she didn't even look in the princess's direction. She turned away and explained that she couldn't properly take care of the prince as a child. Immediately after his birth, her illness worsened, and she went to the mountains for several years to undergo treatment. His Majesty highly praised the talent of Prince Sunam. They say that the day when he first and last received praise from His Majesty was the day when he diligently studied, and that's why Prince Somnam is so obsessed with his studies and self-improvement. He truly wants to be the best at everything. Therefore, the woman did not understand how she could be a good mother. Having learned about this only very recently, she considered it absolutely impossible. Sonbi was shocked by what she heard. She didn't even know, because in the original, they didn't say this. And this means that he was so determined to study just to get recognition from the king. Then, suddenly, the Han took the princess by the hand and said that she was very sorry that she had left her for so long. She smiled and said that even though her strength was small, she would no longer allow sleep to be subjected to such humiliation. This definitely could not happen again. When they apologized to the girl, she was very shocked because she had not seen this word for a very, very long time. And hearing it turned out to be completely unpleasant for me. On the contrary, she even liked it. After that, they continued drinking tea and eating their sweets. But then suddenly, the prince, who was already returning back to the palace holding a book in his hands, saw his mother. He immediately ran up to her and said hello. The woman immediately came closer to him and asked how his audience went. The boy replied that everything was fine. However, he was very surprised to see her there, considering that the princess was sitting next to her. Hong pointed towards the girl and said that she came to this place for a walk with the princess in order to spend some time with her. The boy was very surprised. He did not expect that she would want to spend time with her, and even more so when he saw a dream about her in a new image. He could not even recognize her. His mother suddenly laughed and asked if he was really so surprised, because she looked so cute. Unlike before, she actually noticed the change in his facial expression. The boy immediately became embarrassed. Then he said that, in fact, his sister had always been nice, so her judgment was wrong. When the Dream Bee heard these words, she immediately looked at her brother. She noticed that he blushed incredibly and assumed that this was precisely why it happened. The girl thanked them for their compliments. But at that moment, she wondered if this was really what family meant. The girl suggested that perhaps if she had a real family, then probably she would have the same thing. All this was very awkward, strange, and unusual. However, it was not disgusting at all. And so, while they were enjoying the wonderful weather in the gazebo, the young man who was watching the princess came to Madame Go. When the woman saw him, she immediately threw a cup at his head. Fortunately, the guy managed to dodge in time and was not hurt. But Madame Go looked at him with an angry look and asked, did he really leave her in this state and go off to have fun? At that moment, he noticed that the entire tea set was lying on the floor and there was blood on her hand. The guy immediately knelt down and bowed. He said that they changed the princess into new clothes in the pavilion. And then they went for a walk. Madame Guo immediately laughed upon hearing this. She couldn't believe that in the end, this idiot actually did this, although this is exactly what she expected from Hall. She thought that the woman would sit peacefully on the sidelines. However, it seems she will have to be torn out by the roots before it is too late. Madame Go also added that soon he will apparently finally have to act. Having bowed, the man answered the lady that if such was her order, then he was ready to carry it out, no matter what it took. This man was Kim Ji-song. He was a faithful servant of the Honorable Madame Go. At that very moment, the king was on a military sortie when a bird flew up to him and brought rather sad news from the palace. The assistant who was with him, seeing that his facial expression had changed, immediately asked if something had really happened in the palace. But the king did not immediately answer this question. He only asked what his assistant thought about the family. An elderly man in a red uniform replied that family is a bond that cannot be broken. The man then seriously thought about these words. After all, he had thrown off these bonds and somehow killed his brother. From that very moment, he decided to live only like a king. However, now when he learned the news that Madame kept the child in captivity for a year and 3 days, he felt something. He also didn't understand why the image of this sweet little girl whom she was bullying suddenly appeared before his eyes. Finally, the man turned around and started driving away towards the estate and told everyone to get ready to return. His assistant, of course, was indignant upon hearing this, because they still had quite a lot of things to do. To this, the king only replied that they should complete the work in the remaining time and calm down no matter what happened. They must arrive at the palace in any case within a few days. Sun, B, who had now improved the situation in her extension, was incredibly happy because everything had changed and she felt wonderful. After that horrible fake lady Choi was fired, they assigned her another lady named Kim. And the girl's wardrobe was even replenished with new beautiful silk outfits that looked incredibly good on her. And even the food became much better. Now this place finally looked like a human dwelling and not what it had been before. When Somnet came to check on her to make sure that everything was okay with her, he really noticed these changes around her. The guy looked around and said that last time he already thought that this place could collapse at any moment. However, they tried a little and changed the situation. The girl immediately began to resist. She said that in this place, she had clearly become much better. At least, unlike before, she now had a brush and special ink for drawing. And in many ways, everything had become much better, so she didn't understand why he was so picky. Then she handed a small drawing to her brother so that he could make sure that these things were really necessary for her development. When he looked at this drawing, he was very surprised. It was completely unclear what was drawn there. The Dream Bee answered that it was a person. She asked him to hold this drawing facing her for a while. Of course, her brother was immediately very surprised and asked why he needed to do this. Dream Bee explained that the first thing she wanted to explain to her brother was acupuncture points. Of course, he was not satisfied with this, because he thought that she would start teaching him martial arts. The girl took a needle in her hands and said that what she would teach him was not martial arts, but the art of killing. She said in a fascinated voice that in the art of murder, there were no techniques for damaging the enemy. There were only techniques designed for killing. The boy then asked, does this really mean that if he masters the art of the killer, he will be able to kill a person using only one needle? But fate explained that the art of murder is a technique that hits vital points and kills a person. And also this technique which increases the chances of survival if a person knows it. That is why the girl wanted to pass this technique on to the Comnat and save him. The guy didn't object. Then he asked if this really meant that he first needed to learn these acupuncture points. Sonbi explained that the foundation of art is of course physical training. However, the man was already training, so she decided to move straight to the next stage. In the drawing of a person, she made several holes in different parts of the body, and the crumpler should have remembered their location. The girl smiled and replied that everything was exactly like that. However, this arrangement should not deviate by even 1 millimeter, because the next time her brother comes to her lesson, he will be punching paper on his own and will have to do it all correctly. He was a little upset because he thought that they would train with various new techniques. He even brought a sword with him and asked if that was all. But the dream would say that, at the moment, the needle would seem very heavy to him, so it would be best to simply put the sword aside, and for some time, even they would not return to it. Since it was the first lesson, she was going to figure out the addresses because, in her opinion, it was a really important part. The girl asked him to call her a teacher in class. When I heard this with him, he looked at her with an alarmed look. He didn't understand why he had to do this. He immediately began to be indignant at her and said that no matter what, he was her older brother, so he did not understand how she could even set such conditions for him. But the dream insisted on its own. She even raised the needle up so that he would understand the seriousness of her intentions. In the end, he still gave in and called her a teacher, and also asked her to lower her needle. To make him feel better, the girl explained that they would only use this form of address when they were alone, and that twice a week they would have lessons in a separate pavilion in the backyard, so that no one would suspect anything. Somnet decided to close this topic with the appeals. He looked at the piece of paper with many holes in various parts, and said that since he needed to learn this, then of course he would do it, because it was for his own good. The guy also added that he heard that the teacher was injured by the roads of the venerable Madame Go, and asked if everything was okay with her, because he was still a little worried. The girl was of course surprised to hear his concern, but said that she was fine. Madame Quebina had taken good care of her, so she was incredibly grateful to her for that. Somp then thought about it and realized that she needed to get a name as soon as possible so that this would not happen again, because it was completely wrong. In fact, after he met the teacher, he began searching for information about abandoned members of the royal family in historical archives. There had been cases in the past where an abandoned member of the royal family had actually received a name for themselves, so he believed that she could do the same. In fact, such a child showed a talent for literature. He independently studied the 4 books and the Pentateuch, and was recognized as the best student of the mentors of their Songwigwan. When they petitioned the king, he recognized his talent, and of course granted him a name. And it was the name of Hongun. However, the boy suddenly realized that his teacher would not be able to go and study with the mentors, so it was unlikely that this information could help her much. But the girl no longer listened to him. After she heard this story, she realized that training with mentors sounded very interesting. For her, a top agent with her talents, getting there would be very easy. Although she is stronger in martial arts, the fact is that she also mastered the art of killing. Besides, she graduated with honors from a university whose name she couldn't even remember. However, she believed that perhaps she could at least try to do this. First of all, it would be nice to learn the basics of writing and the science of this world, so she told her brother that she would go and study with us, the mentors. This was her goal. The guy, hearing this, was very indignant. He said that he did not understand what nonsense she was talking about, how a princess could go and study there. The girl frowned and replied that everything was very simple. If she asked her father, then perhaps he would help her do it, and then everything would work out for her. But the Somnet replied that meeting his father was not such an easy matter. However, at that moment he was very surprised because the door to her chambers opened and the king himself entered there. But in fact, sometime before the king came to the annex to his daughter, he turned to the chief advisor who accompanied him on the expedition. The man asked him if it was true that the guy had a little son. The advisor immediately said that this was true information. Then the king was going to ask him one question. The man, of course, did not object. However, he was a little worried. The advisor found all this strange because as soon as he returned from his trip, he immediately called a council that lasted for half a day. This alarmed him very much, and he did not understand what it was connected with. After some time had passed from this meeting, he also brought the princess with him. The girl could not sit there for long, so she even fell asleep. In fact, this man mercilessly dealt with his half-brothers, so it would have cost him nothing to behead at any moment some nameless princess who was peacefully sleeping on his left hand. At some point, the advisor even thought that perhaps he was looking for a special excuse to do just that. However, the princess was still too young. Therefore, he felt very sorry for her. But then suddenly the king asked the elderly man what his son loved most. Of course, no one present expected to hear such a question. Of course, the advisor could not ignore this question. He bowed and said that his son loved studying the most. The men were very surprised to hear this. However, the guy replied that it was true. But this was only one of the things that his son liked. But he couldn't answer for all the other children, or anyone in particular. After all, each child had their own preferences. Then the king rephrases his question and asks what girls usually like in that case. His comrade was very surprised. However, he tried to remain calm and said that it depended on what kind of girl they were talking about, and it would be nice if he said her age. After all, this was also a very important factor. At that moment, the king looked at the princess, who continued to sleep. He raised his hand, and his comrade was worried that he would take it and hit her. Fortunately, this did not happen. The king only said in a polite voice that she was still a baby at about that age. Then the comrade asked in order to know the preference for sure. Was he really asking about what the princess might like? Seeing how embarrassed the king was, he realized that this was a true assumption, and he ultimately asked the king for forgiveness and asked if there was a reason why he decided to call the princess to this meeting today. The man looked at his daughter and then said in a quiet voice that children are older, and seeing how their fathers work, they begin to admire them more. He just wanted to listen to the accumulated reports from everyone present. So, in his opinion, everything came together successfully. After this, the man looked at the chief eunuch and asked what he thought about this. Perhaps the man in the green uniform came closer and said that he completely agreed. However, he said, "In my opinion, she doesn't really admire or follow me, but rather she's bored and dozing." After that, he asked what the advisors thought about this now. Of course, they immediately agreed with him. And the eunuch himself thought that this would definitely be better than dragging her to the training ground where she could easily get injured. However, he did not understand how it was possible to force a 5-year-old child to sit in the light for so many hours in a row, since she simply had nothing to do there. They continued to lead a dream until she finally woke up, looked at the king, and called him father, thereby greatly surprising everyone present. The eunuch did not expect her to do something like that, and in the end he assumed he had misheard, and she said that her leg hurt because she had been sitting for a long time, rather than calling him father. He absolutely did not understand how it was possible to address the king so disrespectfully. In the end, everyone in the hall was sure that he would now definitely kill the princess for this. Their expectations were not met. The king, on the contrary, smiled joyfully and asked the girl what she wanted. Sonbi said something. And after that, the man turned to everyone present and ended their advice on this. He was going to go back to his palace. Now it was clear to everyone present that His Majesty the King was showing favor to the princess, because he even took her to his palace. When Sonbi came to him in peace, strong, delicious tea and several unusual desserts were waiting for her there. She didn't understand at all what was happening, because she thought that she would be able to overhear some important information, but he had been doing this all day, holding meetings and not discussing anything useful there. The girl had to sit on her knees for more than 3 hours, which caused her legs to hurt, but of course she didn't tell anyone about it. She was very alarmed by the fact that after they brought the treat, he simply silently continued to watch her when Sanbai did not even touch a single sweet. He still asked why she did not eat anything. The girl thought for a moment. She didn't understand what he wanted from her at all. She thought that she too would need to reflect on sublime things with him, and therefore didn't touch the treats. Then she took one of the desserts. However, the king didn't like it and asked in surprise, "Can she really eat her fill with such a small piece?" She knew that the king was definitely not the type to eat non-refined food, so she assumed that perhaps he would like to take these delicacies. The men continued to simply watch her and did not say anything to her. This immediately reminded her of how before, everyone always watched her while she ate something at lunch. To make it less awkward for her, she handed him a plate of treats and told him to try some too. The king was pleasantly surprised. He immediately hid this surprise on his face and, turning away from the girl, said that he didn't need it. She could eat herself. The girl was very angry. She didn't understand what was wrong with him. Why was he doing all this? But the king said that she should also drink the tea that was in front of her to the bottom. This was a mandatory condition. He said that he specially ordered it to be prepared because it was very good for digestion. So it was not only healthy, but also tasty. Sonbi was amazed that he decided to show such concern and asked for specially prepared tea for digestion. This could only mean that the king was worried about her, and that would certainly be very strange. The girl couldn't take her eyes off him, and the man felt uncomfortable about it. So he asked why she was looking at him like that. The girl explained that she simply showed him that he was worried about her. Then the king explained that she was already very weak, and that he had also tired her out quite a lot. Because of this, he was worried that she could collapse from fatigue. The man also decided to change the topic of conversation in order to get to know her a little better, and said that he heard that while he was away, she often met with Prince Somnam. She agreed and said that she met her brother by chance, and he ended up saving her from danger several times. Sonbi continued to eat sweets, and the king asked what this prince seemed like to her. Of course, the girl did not miss the chance to praise him, and said that he could not even imagine how well her brother treated her. He was very erudite, kind, reliable, and worthy of respect. The king suddenly became very upset. He said that he now understands that while he was gone, she was having a lot of fun. Some even say that she wasn't looking for him at all. Of course, hearing these words and seeing his upset expression, she realized that for some reason he was offended. So she decided to improve her relationship with him a little. The girl praised him and said that he really behaved very well at this meeting, was brave, and even cooler, so he was also worthy of respect. The man ignored this compliment. He still fixated on the Somnami print and said that she was lucky that this time she met him. However, the palace was a very dangerous place, so she had to be very careful next time. He also said that her birthday would be coming up soon, and asked if there was anything she would like to receive as a gift. Sonbi did not understand at all why he behaved this way. At some point, she even thought that he had eaten something wrong and gotten poisoned because of it. In any case, she was going to take the chance and hint to him about studying with the mentors. She said that she would like to go to the dynasty school. The girl believed that this time she would definitely ask to be sent there to be irradiated, and was going to do everything to make him agree to do it. In fact, Sonbi didn't directly tell him that she wanted to study there, because she had been able to hone excellent skills in the war, and therefore decided to use them. She said that the fact that he was nearby was a great gift for her, but the man, of course, objected to this, and said that this was not at all true. Sonbi continued to insist on her own, and said that she was incredibly happy just because he was spending time with her and talking to her so serenely. Then, the man seriously thought about it, and said that apparently she missed communicating with people. But then again, it grew alone in a separate pavilion, so it was really not surprising. The man thought about where she could have a full conversation with people, and eventually decided which place would be ideal for this. She didn't understand anything at all. She was interested in what conclusion he came to. But the man was simply glowing with joy. He said that in order for her to truly understand the meaning of training and discussions, she would have to go to the place he had thought of for her. But he still did not clearly name it. In the end, the girl didn't have time to ask him for anything because he didn't let her get a word in edgewise. And that's how their little tea party ended. The next day, she had a sleepwalking lesson planned, and when she told him everything, the boy realized that she had really missed an incredibly good chance to ask for what she needed. He asked, did this really mean that she didn't even ask her father for anything? At that moment, he was simultaneously setting up special points for fatal blows. When the girl didn't answer anything, everything immediately became clear to him. She also said that she had no idea that their father would be so clueless. She thought that he would at least ask her something again. In response to this, I eventually realized that she knew absolutely nothing about Dad, and for this reason made completely wrong conclusions. In any case, she was going to ask him to send her to Chanhak again. The girl said that, of course, she would definitely do it. She just didn't know when yet. However, the boy still asked why she wanted to do this. She also wants her skills to be recognized in the Chanhak, and she would be able to receive their recommendation. She replied that, of course, this was also one of her goals. However, first of all, it seemed to her that she would have a lot of fun there. At that moment, she took the sheet of paper from him in order to check the points that he had placed. Of course, her boyfriend began to doubt that she even knew what kind of schools these were, because it definitely wasn't supposed to be fun there. He said that Changhak is a special department established to educate children of the royal family like them. He told her a few more interesting facts from history, but the girl didn't listen to him at all because she was checking his homework. And when she had done all this, she said that he had finally learned everything without a single mistake. The guy breathed a sigh of relief, but in order to appear cool, he said that it was actually very simple and did not present any difficulty for him at all. The girl understood perfectly well that he was lying to her, because she noticed the dark circles under his eyes and realized that he had not slept for a very long time in order to remember everything perfectly. After everything was checked, she suggested that he move on to the next stage. The guy was immediately happy. He thought that she would finally begin to teach him how to fight with a sword, but this did not happen. The girl gave him a small box. He immediately opened it and saw multicolored threads with needles. This really amazed him. Sonbi explained that it was very difficult for her to find this sewing kit, so it was best for him to take very good care of it. His boyfriend immediately asked what he was supposed to do with these things, because he didn't understand at all. The girl did not understand his questions. After all, nothing could be done with a needle and thread except embroidery. Summit, upon hearing this, was immediately surprised, but his sister explained that she thought that Camellia could be suitable as a pattern. In a week, she had to embroider exactly the same pattern on 7 pieces of fabric. For a while, he just sat there and looked at her in surprise, and finally he put the sewing kit aside and turned to his teacher in a serious voice. The guy wondered if she was really insulting him now, because embroidery was, after all, a woman's job. So he didn't understand why he had to hold a needle in his hands instead of a ball, as he expected. Of course, she didn't like such judgments. However, she was in a different era, so she couldn't do anything about it. She understood him perfectly, so she asked him to calm down and listen to her. The girl explained that the technique she taught him allows you to kill a person with 1 needle. However, this can only be possible if the needle is quickly inserted into the right place. And since he has already learned where to inject, it is time to learn how to do it correctly. And even though he understood the correctness of these actions, it still seemed to him that he could not do this. The girl sighed heavily and was very irritated. She could not understand why she had to explain every little thing like that. But in the end, she took the sewing kits from him and said that since he didn't want to, she was forcing him not to. It was his right. In the end, her brother finally came to his senses. He took his kit from her and said that he would do it. The guy thought that since he had already promised to do anything, that was exactly what he would do. He was confident that he could handle even such a task. So he asked her to give him this thing. Sunbi too. That's exactly what she did. And she was pleasantly surprised. She realized that he really had incredible persistence, and this only played into his hands. Besides, he couldn't perfectly learn all the instant death points in one day without a single mistake. This child is smarter and smarter than anyone she's ever met. Finally, after thinking for a while, he told his teacher that he had never embroidered before, so he wasn't sure he could complete this task in a week. Sonbei thought that he would definitely manage somehow, so she told him to bring the work as soon as it was ready. When suddenly, her maid Kim knocked on her door. She told the girl that she needed to urgently convey something to her. When she went inside, she said that the king ordered the princess to go to Chonghak. When the brother and sister heard this, they were so shocked that for some time they did not even say a word. The maid explained that he said it was a gift for all her missed birthdays over the last 5 years she had lived. Dream B could not believe that it was true. In the end, the maids washed her thoroughly, dressed her in beautiful clothes, and the girl was already supposed to go to that place. She considered all this very suspicious. The girl did not understand at all what the king wanted from her. After all, before he had not shown even the slightest attention to her, but now he was giving her such gifts. At that very moment, the king was in his chambers. A servant came to him and brought him a special potion, as he had requested. She also warned him that the great chancellor Kim Bubon had arrived. The man, nevertheless, allowed him to enter. When the chancellor entered the king's chambers, seeing him in bed, he was very surprised, and immediately asked if everything was all right with him. The king was very angry about all this. He didn't like such formalities, and he also said that he thought Kim had come again for the same reason, so he asked him to quickly tell everyone about everything. The chancellor bowed and said that Her Majesty's seat had been empty for 5 years, and asked why the man was delaying this appointment for so long. The man sighed heavily and replied that he had clearly said that he had postponed it due to illness, so he did not understand why they were pestering him with these questions again. Kim replied that, first of all, he should definitely take care of his health. However, he still believed that this place could not be left empty for so long. As a last resort, he asked the man to tell him about his illness, and then he could find a way to cure him, and perhaps in that case, he could finally find a worthy candidate for the position of queen. The king was silent for a while and thought about it, after which he agreed and said that, apparently, the time had come to tell about his illness, since he could not delay any longer. His illness that had been tormenting him for the last 5 years was somnambulism. When the Chancellor heard this, he was very shocked. He knew this illness very well. But the king continued his story, and said that those who guarded his chambers said that he unconsciously wandered around the palace and waved his sword. When he sat on the throne and constantly saw nightmares, the queen was always there and protected him. But after the queen left, the symptoms became even worse. He was recently informed that Her Majesty Queen Seohyun had passed away. And of course, he was very upset about this. It was a strong blow to him. Besides, he thought that the princess would be very similar to the queen. However, when he met her, he realized that she was incredibly similar to him. And, as luck would have it, that night after meeting the princess and hearing the news of the queen's death, he had a truly terrible nightmare. There was a dream in which a child, who was exactly like him, brutally killed the queen before his eyes. Of course, he then woke up in a cold sweat. For some time, the man did not understand what was reality and what was a dream. Finally, his hands began to shake, and he realized that it was he who was guilty of the queen's death. The man could not even contain his emotions and burst into tears. The ghosts he killed were killing her with his face. Every day he dreamed of the same nightmare, and he couldn't even breathe normally after such dreams. At one point, when the nightmares began to drive him completely crazy, he came to the sleeping child and was about to kill her, but he managed to come to his senses in time. The man realized that she was completely innocent, and he had no right to do this. However, at that moment, two opinions clashed within him. He believed that he could have done this, and perhaps he would have gotten rid of this feeling of guilt. He didn't understand who he could take out all the anger that had accumulated inside him on. Ultimately, all the symptoms of his illness only got worse. When the king told the chancellor this situation, he ultimately said that after this, he secretly asked the doctor to bring him a strong potion that killed all kinds of feelings. The man listened to him attentively, bowed, and said that his humble servant was too incompetent to look after his health. So he asked him for forgiveness for being harsh with him. Of course, the king took it all normally. He said that recently, thanks to the princess, his illness had gradually begun to go away. Kim certainly didn't expect to hear this. He asked, how could it have happened that, thanks to the princess, his illness had gone away? He really didn't understand it. At that moment, the man suddenly remembered what his daughter looked like and, smiling, said that she made him laugh, and even began to call him her dad. But he, having plunged into some kind of nightmare, abandoned this child alone for so long. But for some reason, she still began to reach out closer to him, and this melted his heart. He asked if it was true that it was very surprising that the child who looked like a monster in his nightmares turned out to be a very cheerful and bright helper for him in life.